ambasciata statunitense in Roma in collaborazione con l'Agenzia Spaziale Italiana. E grazie di essere presenti. Un secondo appuntamento con un rappresentante della NASA, un ingegnere aerospaziale, la signora Nagaraja. Noi siamo contenti di questo ulteriore appuntamento, anche visto i risultati che stanno avendo, piuttosto copiosi. È come se l'auditorium dell'Agenzia Spaziale Italiana fosse regolarmente pieno in queste occasioni. La prossima settimana sarà la volta ai due esponenti dell'Agenzia Spaziale Italiana. Io voglio a questo punto introdurre chi condurrà la giornata di oggi, ma anche la principale organizzatrice di questo evento, e che è Marlene Nice, vice addetto culturale dell'ambasciata statunitense, che io ringrazio ancora una volta per questa bella iniziativa.
Ciao, thank you, Francesco. We're really pleased at the U.S. Embassy once again to join the Italian Space Agency and NASA to bring you this series of programs we call From Home to Space. I know it's really challenging to work in this difficult time, and we're really grateful for the technology that allows us to connect in this way. You know, I still want to send out condolences to all the victims and families who are suffering with coronavirus, and we are working hard. The U.S. government and the U.S. Embassy is working with Italy and your leaders to try and get through this. So we're with you on this. Anyway, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Her name is Mamta Patel Nagaraja. Dr. Nagaraja works at NASA headquarters as the Deputy Director for the Division of Science Engagements and Partnerships for the Science Mission Directorate. She's also an adjunct professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Catholic University. Dr. Nagaraja manages the Women at NASA program, and she's the founder of the NASA Girls and Boys program. She provides mentoring opportunities for middle school students. She's trained astronauts who flew the US Space Shuttle and the International Space Station. These are just a few of Dr. Nagaraja's many accomplishments. I hope that you'll take a chance to look her up and read her bio and read so much more about her. During the presentation, please use the chat on the YouTube channel and send us some questions, because after the presentation, I'll be taking the questions and sending them off to Dr. Nagaraja for answering. And also the slides are going to start as soon as we start our program. So Mamta Patel Nagaraja, it is your microphone now.
Thank you so much, Marlene, and thank you to the Italian Space Agency and the U.S. Embassy for having me here today. I will begin to share my slides and say I think the entire world could use a little bit of hope right now and a little bit of positivity. And I will try to bring that to you through the lens of science. You see, because I think and I believe that we are all explorers. There is something innate in us about wanting to know what is beyond. What is, when you're lying down on the grass, maybe you have children, maybe you as a child would lie down on the grass and look up. I know that I did, and I know that my children do. And we just wonder, what is there beyond the skies? Think of it like this. When I would train the astronauts and they would come back home, I would ask them personally, what was it that you remember the most about your trip? And inevitably, most of them would say, oh, flying through the atmosphere and then looking back at our home planet. And there's actually a name for this because it has such a profound effect on our astronauts. This experience is known as the overview effect. They are struck by how connected we all are on this fragile ball of life. And I think that's just incredible that somebody and that a group of people from around the world have this opportunity to look back and see our home planet. When Voyager 1 sent back the farthest image of Earth ever taken in 1990, this marks the 30-year anniversary of getting this image back. Humanity did not marvel at the notion that a spacecraft with the wattage of a refrigerator light bulb was able to send a picture back to us 3.7 billion miles from the sun. But instead, What we marveled at was this tiny pixel, as Carl Sagan called it, the pale blue dot. And my slides are not advancing, so let me pause here and see if I can fix that technical difficulty. There we go. Yes, so we marveled not at what it took to send this image back, but that we saw a tiny little dot and a streak of light. And here you can see our home planet. Everything that we all know in any country is right there on that tiny little dot in the streak of light. Missions to space are the dreams and aspirations of thousands of people, all very different, but we all have a shared goal. The story I'd like to present today is that of a telescope we all know, the Hubble Space Telescope, a partnership of many countries across the world. But it begins not in today's world, but back in the 1600s, when a visionary Italian scientist, Galileo Galilei, looked into the sky with a newly invented telescope. He completely changed how humanity thought of itself and its place in this world. He observed Jupiter's moons and provided the argument that maybe, just maybe, the Earth was not the center of the universe, an innovative thought in his time. He started a revolution in astronomy. 380 years later, we watched together as a world as the Hubble Space Telescope launched aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery. NASA, along with partners at the European Space Agency, started yet another astronomical revolution. The Hubble Space Telescope orbits 340 miles or 547 kilometers above Earth. At 17,000 miles per hour or 27,354 kilometers per hour, it moves around our planet continuously. Millions of people from around the world have viewed Hubble's inspiring photos. It has made more than 1.3 million observations and continues to transmit 150 gigabits of data every week. It gives us an eye, lets us see what our universe looks like. These images, to me, I remember when I first saw them, I thought there is no way that these could be real. I thought for sure somebody was painting them. But indeed, I have been convinced, looking at all of the images that have come from this incredible international endeavor, and I marvel at them, just like people did at our Earth when Voyager sent back that image. It is incredible what we can do with technology, what we can do together when we come and we are united to tackle some of the hardest problems. And we learn much more about who we are, where we came from, and what else is out there. Scientists have worked together in diverse teams to make profound discoveries with Hubble's data. For example, last year, a team of international astronomers discovered a black hole disk that shouldn't exist, in their words. This team included scientists from Italy, America, Israel, and Spain. Scientist Marco Chiaberge, a member of the team at the Space Telescope Institute, wrote, in his words, "Without Hubble, we wouldn't have been able to see this because the black hole region has low luminosity. The luminosities of the stars in the galaxy outshine anything in the nucleus. So if you observe it from the ground, you're dominated by the brightness of the stars, which drowns the feeble emission from the nucleus." This image is incredible to me. I know my children ask me what black holes are when they hear them. I know from managing the science.nasa.gov website that the most commonly searched terms looking for information on NASA's website are black hole. Those are the most commonly searched terms month after month after month. There is something about black holes that just make us wonder what is in there. Our curiosity drives wanting this knowledge. This was an incredible discovery by the Hubble Space Telescope and an incredible example of what happens when we come together, when we are united. And look at this, it's science that is uniting us. I think that is an incredible thing. And I think that it should be incredibly, I hope, inspirational to any of the young generation watching this, that you can find this sort of partnership, this teamwork, this gratification of tackling something together and discovering in science. That's amazing to me. I know that's what drew me to science and engineering as a young kid. Hubble is undeniably the most productive scientific instrument ever built. 15,000 papers and more have been published from Hubble data, and they have been cited more than 738,000 times. As a scientist who has done her PhD, I know that those are incredible numbers. What an impact that this telescope has had on the scientific community. Humanity as a species, I think, draws strength from unity. And I hope after hearing about that example, you will agree that unity can be found in science. It has an incredible power over life. I know for myself, science has impacted me in a profound way. When I was a little girl, I have 3 sisters and a brother, and the oldest, who actually had no interest in science, but saw that I did, one day, I must have been, I'm going to guess maybe 10 or 11 years old. And she said, Mamta, come with me. And we did not own a telescope. We did not have enough money to own a telescope, but we had a university in our small town out in West Texas, really in the middle of nowhere. And we were lucky to have a university that did have a telescope. So she took me as a young girl. And I guess that night they had a sky watching opportunity. And the scientist had set up the telescope and they said, go ahead, look through. And when I looked through, I saw this planet. And it was the first time in my life that I had ever touched a telescope, certainly looked through one, and been able to see something more than a twinkling little star in the night sky. And I, as a stubborn young woman, I demanded to know who had painted Saturn on the end of that telescope, because there was no way I could believe that was out in the night sky. But indeed, before I left, I checked the end of the telescope and there was no painting on it. And I had known that when I looked through that telescope, I had seen a planet in the sky, and it made a tremendous impact on me, because I wouldn't be here in front of you today working for NASA had I not had these moments that mentors and sisters and parents had given to me, such as looking through a telescope for the first time and seeing a planet. So I'll leave you with this. I wonder after this if you will walk away and go, what impact has science had on me? And I hope that you will come to an answer to that question, because I know science has had an impact on me today. And I would argue that it probably has had an impact on you as well. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you. I am more than happy to answer your questions and spend as much time with you as we have today.
Mamta, thank you so much for that. We don't have any questions coming in yet, but I wanted to ask you, as I wait for some others to ask questions, what's the lifespan of the Hubble telescope? How many years has it been there, and how many more years do we expect to use it before the technology becomes too old?
Yes, so it's been up there 30 years. We just celebrated, or it's coming up this month, the 30-year anniversary of the Hubble Space Telescope. In terms of number of years that are left on it, it really depends. I would estimate about 5, but I don't know if that's an exact number. It really just depends on, as you said, as the technology degrades. We aren't servicing it anymore. We serviced it with the shuttle missions, but when it goes, it will go, basically. But I would guess about 5 more years if I had to take a guess.
And then what would you do with it when, in 5 more years, what's the plan?
I don't know. Actually, that's a really good question. For any spacecraft in general, there's different ways that we could handle it. They've brought spacecraft back safely, had them land in the ocean. There have been spacecraft that they have retired in different ways. I don't know what the plan for Hubble is, though.
Okay, we have a bunch of questions that came in while we were talking. So Alessio Varallo asks, I am an aerospace engineering student. Do you have any advice for students who would love to pursue a career in the space industry?
Oh, so many different things you could do. So one is if you have any interest in science, I highly recommend the citizen science areas that we have available, and you can get to them quite easily if you go to science.nasa.gov. Right there in the top menu is citizen science. Many of those projects, and all of them can be done by anybody in the world, but many of them only require you to have a cell phone or a computer with an internet connection. So that's where I would tell this student to first start, because you can use actual data, real NASA or ESA or other space agency data, because many of our projects are partnered, and you can try to look for a planet in your own backyard. That's called Backyard Worlds, for example. You can use a Globe app, and Globe is an international endeavor, and you can start studying the clouds or put in your observations of things you see in your own environment and learn how we take all of that data together and try to improve or help society. So that's citizen science if you go to science.nasa.gov. There are sometimes international opportunities to work with NASA, and I know that there can be opportunities with the European Space Agency as well. So I would encourage the student to look those up just by simply Googling ESA internships, NASA internships for international students.
Great, and that was Alessio's second question, actually, about internships. Okay, so Bianca C. asks or says, unfortunately, nowadays there is a lot of disbelief toward science and toward astrophysics too, which is sad to me because there's so much to learn. Do you think there's a way to approach people who are skeptical and convince them to trust science?
Much like the young Mamta who decided that somebody had painted Saturn on the telescope rather than actually seen it. I think a lot of the hands-on can do it. For me, it really was actually going and looking at the end of the telescope and seeing that nobody had painted it, and that what I had seen was truly out in the night sky. So I think hands-on can do it. Sometimes I think it's really the disbelief in science to me sometimes, and it's hard for me because I am a scientist, so I'm biased towards science, but sometimes I think it's just not hearing not being able to hear the entire picture. So having somebody actually explain it to you in words that you can understand, and then not being able to ask the questions and have them answered. So one-on-one interactions or small group interactions where you can actually ask your question and say, look, this is what you say is true about the earth, but I don't understand it. And then helping that person really see it. And then when they question the data, being able to continue to show them until they maybe see it. And you're always going to get a population who just doesn't believe you. And at that point, they just don't believe you, but you can rest easier knowing that you have tried, that you have shown them the data, that you have shown them the science behind it. I think it's really important to be able to have those personal experiences to make science real.
Great. Okay. Pasquale Scognamiglio asks, will man one day discover what is hidden in a black hole?
Ooh, gosh, I think maybe 5 years ago, we would have said, no, we really don't know that much about black holes. But we have had recent discoveries like the one that I mentioned that have really taught us quite a bit about what black holes are, what they have. We even have the first picture of a black hole, which to me was amazing that we were able to see what it looks like. So yes, I think one day we will discover what is in the black hole. I think we'll know a lot more about black holes. And remember, we get the next space telescope, hopefully in the next year, launched, and that's the Webb Space Telescope. And I think Webb will allow us to see further and deeper into our universe, even more than Hubble has. And Hubble has been incredible, as we talked about.
Okay. The next one is Sahana Shastri asks, or she says, staying at home during this time makes it easy to lose the sense of purpose behind all our hard work. So this was a much needed talk. Thanks for that. No question there, but just a little thanks.
And I agree. Being at home and being socially distant is the right thing to do, but it is hard. It is tough on people. But I am so happy to hear that this helped. And I'm happy to hear that you're at home as well, doing our part to keep this world as safe as we can.
Okay. Anselmo Bettio says, my question is, can the space and exploration sector make the Earth's nations more united in the future?
Gosh, I would hope so. I feel like we've done quite a job in the last 20 years even, and that's about as long as we've had the International Space Station. But as you know, Hubble preceded that. It's been 30 years. So I feel like international partnerships have just grown over time as we realize coming together and using our resources together gets us so much more. We can tackle harder problems. We have different perspectives to approach problem solving. We can combine our resources and get a bigger bang for your buck, as they say here in the United States. So yes, I do think that partnerships will continue to get stronger. I think we have a track record of showing that partnerships get stronger over time, and we will continue to pursue such a way of exploring space.
Okay. Filippo Amato asks, he says, hi, Mamta. Do you enjoy more technical or managerial tasks? How do you balance the two? And how has this balance influenced your career?
That is probably one of the best questions I have ever gotten. And one of the hardest for me to answer. Gosh, do I enjoy technical or managerial more? I used to be technical up until about a year, maybe a couple years ago, when I started taking on more of a supervisor role. I love being a manager. I love helping people be the best that they are at their areas of expertise, helping them prioritize and work out the issues they may be having to find success. I find it really rewarding. I miss the technical on many days, not all days, but many days I miss the technical, I miss the challenge and the problem solving. But it's funny, leadership in and of itself is challenging. It's just a totally different challenge. It's more about helping people. How do you motivate and inspire your employees to be the very best that they are? How do you help them overcome their obstacles? So there's parallels in there. You are problem solving, but a different kind of problem solving.
Okay. Raffaele Minichini asks, what can we expect from the James Webb Telescope?
You can expect to be able to see the first light, so the first light that came from the universe, to be able to see further and deeper into the universe than we have ever seen before. I think that's going to be incredible. When we get that first image back from the Webb Space Telescope, I think that will be when we are just absolutely blown away, much the way we are when we see Hubble images, and the way Hubble images came in its first few years as well. I think we'll see a sense of that, but even greater, because we'll be able to see so much further into the universe. There's a chance that we'll also be able to see other solar systems and other places where there could be life. The Webb Space Telescope will also have ways to be able to look at changes in the atmospheres of those distant planets that it's able to find. So I think it's just going to be a really powerful telescope that lets us see incredible things in our universe, things that we have not even seen yet. And I feel like when I look at the Hubble images, we've seen so much. And it's crazy to me to think that there's more out there that we don't know and that we haven't seen. So I think that's what you can expect from Webb.
Okay. Sahana Shastri is back and asking, how do you push yourself to put constant effort in during difficult times or times when you didn't see results for very long?
Yeah. So for me, especially in this current time that we're in, it is when I get frustrated or overwhelmed, which I have been quite overwhelmed in the last month on many days, I usually reset myself by thinking about how much more fortunate I am than I realize. For example, I'm employed. And in my particular case, there's very little chance that I'll become unemployed. And for example, my daughter's preschool just furloughed all of their employees. Their entire staff no longer has jobs. And these are people who live paycheck to paycheck already. So I realize when I see this happening around me that I actually have the power to help more than to get frustrated by my own limitations or being overwhelmed by having to have 3 children in the house at the same time as working, which is very overwhelming. And I know many Italian parents are in the same situation as well. But that's usually how I reset myself, as I think about what I do have and how fortunate I am, my health, for example. And there are so many in both of our countries that are suffering right now with this pandemic. So that's usually what I do to reset myself. Even when we're not in a pandemic, I realize how fortunate I am.
Okay. Emanuela Palomba says, I am a science fan, and I want to ask about black holes. If one day it will be possible to better understand the behavior through a law that links quantum mechanics with relativity theories.
Your question is much smarter than I am, I shall say. I imagine that we'll know more. I unfortunately don't know much about it myself, but I have faith that these scientists who have already made such discoveries about black holes will only continue probing and asking questions and continuing their research to help us learn more. But I'm glad you're a science fan as well. So am I.
Akash Kumar asks, how much excitement is there for going back to the moon, and when do you think we'll get there?
An incredible amount of excitement and an incredible number of resources that are being put in place so that we will get back to the moon. And the goal right now is to get there by 2024. So that is what NASA has been told we must go for, and we have been putting our resources in to get there. So maybe very soon we'll be able to relive that excitement. I know that was before I was born, and it is an excitement that I have envied for decades, going, gosh, I wish I had lived during that time when man stepped foot on the moon, if only. So hopefully you and I will get to see this sometime soon.
That doesn't sound very far away, 2024. Daniele Yamuno asks, which, according to you, are the most important things to investigate in the future?
Most important things to investigate. So I think one that is of great interest to many of us is, are we alone? Is there life somewhere else in the universe? And that's a field called astrobiology, the search not just for life elsewhere, but also how did life begin and evolve here on Earth? But I think a number of people across the world would be very interested to know if we are alone, if we are the only life out in the universe. As of now, we are, to our knowledge, but we continue to look and continue to search for life. The second thing I think should be, to me, the highest of priorities is to make sure we continue to protect and improve our own life here on Earth. So using Earth satellite data from across the world to help first responders respond to hurricanes, for example, to know where they are. It's with all of this Earth satellite data that we are able to know where hurricanes are and how quickly they're proceeding and where they're headed and if they're going to make landfall. It's from all of that Earth science data, which I think is incredible. We also use that data to help in wildfires. So getting to first responders, allowing them to know where those fires are, how they're proceeding, and they use that satellite imagery to do such things. But also in things like disease. So we've used Earth science data to, in particular communities. One specific example was with the West Nile virus in South Dakota, where Earth science satellite data was used to figure out where the hot spots were for the West Nile, whenever the West Nile virus a few years ago was infecting numerous people here in the United States. And then using that data, people were able to know when to go outside, when it was safest to be inside. And then that same type of data application is being used in Louisiana as well. So I think that is important, that we continue to use our data to improve and protect life here on Earth as well.
Okay. All righty. Antonio Russo wants to know, how did your PhD program influence your career as an engineer? He says, I'm a PhD student too, and I'm so inspired by your professional experiences and by your positivity.
good. I'm so glad. Gosh. So for getting my PhD was probably one of the best things I have ever done, because it taught me a different way of thinking than you do when you have a bachelor's or even a master's degree. Because when you get to the PhD level, it's really about digging and becoming an expert in one very specific area, building out experiments, at least in the sciences. This could be different in other PhD programs, but in the sciences and engineering, you're really zoning in on one particular area of your field. And so that required a different way of thinking. It was very data-based, research-based. Even today, I still, when I'm looking up information, I will only go to reputable sources, the types of sources I would have used during my dissertation defense only. And it's just changed the way I think and how I approach problems and data gathering, even in my personal life. So I think that's one of the ways it's really impacted me in general. In terms of being an engineer, it also opens up different opportunities. So if you have a PhD level researcher, you're going to, as a supervisor, you're going to assign them different areas that you need worked when you're looking at who your workforce is, and then your bachelor's levels are going to handle different types of jobs. And it's not that one is better than the other. It's just that the way that they're going to handle particular tasks is going to be different. So when you know you have a PhD level student, PhD level graduate, and in the case of actually giving them assignments at work, you'll give them different types of assignments that might require more exploration and detailed work, and that's data driven, for example. Yeah.
Okay. Giuseppe Sicolo says, I know that a lot of astronauts have a military background, such as the Air Force. Is it really necessary to have a military background to participate in space activities, not focused only on research?
That's a great question. The answer is no. You do not have to have a military background. It's not quite 50-50 anymore, but there's a number of people that come from the military. You need them to do the piloting, and often they become the commanders, but not always. But they are the ones who pilot the ships, and I would want them to, because they have such extensive experience in flying vehicles. But then you have an entire civilian set of astronauts as well who do the science. They're the scientists, they're the engineers, and together they work to put the Hubble Space Telescope out into space. That was a mix of military and civilian astronauts as well, to solve problems on the International Space Station. When we were putting the space station together, that was also a mix. So the astronauts come from both military and non-military backgrounds. And when they get into their work, they work together. They can often do the same jobs. The exception, of course, most of our pilots are from the military. So that's the one job that the civilians don't really do it. That's flying the vehicle up into space. But otherwise, they do the same types of jobs, whether it's building, putting something together, fixing it if it's broken, scientific experiments. A lot of those are the scientists. So we have trained non-scientists to do simple experiments on the International Space Station. But when there's a scientist on board, somebody who has a PhD in a scientific discipline, they typically take that on.
Okay. Stefano Giamo asks, he says, thank you for the inspirational speaking. What about data modeling? Do you really have a common shared knowledge model between agencies? This is the first symptom of a winning collaboration, he says.
Yes, he is very smart. I don't know if we have a shared model among our agencies. I'm not sure. So I will tell you, big data is where we struggle quite a bit, because typically what we've had is each group has their own platform to put the data on that we get from our spacecraft. And we haven't really integrated them. I'd say that's, at least for NASA, that's future work. Cross-agency, I don't know that a shared model exists. There's been quite a bit going into making big data government-wide, but they're not quite there yet to have a shared model that I know of, at least.
Okay. Paola Marzioli says, we all know how amazing it was to start to cultivate plants for human nourishment on the ISS. What and when is the next step? Will we arrive to a complete in-orbit production of food in this decade?
Ooh, in this decade. Gosh, I don't know what the time frame is. I do know, so the experiment, I'm guessing you're thinking of is called Veggie, appropriately, of course. But yes, they have grown numerous plants on the space station. They've even eaten the food that those plants have borne, which is incredible to me because it is the first step in being able to potentially do long-term space travel to Mars. Without being able to grow our food, we know that that wouldn't be nearly as successful or possible. So that those are reasons why we're also growing those foods on the International Space Station. In terms of how long it'll take before we are able to do large scale growth, I'm not sure what that time frame is. I'd like to see it in the next decade. I think that's potentially feasible. But I don't really know enough about the hardships they've had in growing that food to know if that is actually possible. But I think if we're going to get to Mars in the next, let's say 20 years or so, we will definitely have to have tackled that problem and achieved a solution.
Like the Martian movie.
Yes. Oh, such a good book and movie.
Okay, so Hannah Shastri is back and she said, are there any measures being taken to teach young students about sustainability of space missions and their impact on the environment alongside general space education?
I think there's definitely been some effort. In colleges, there are specific programs that will have courses such as that. I don't know that there's been a large scale educating students across disciplines, but certainly there are universities in the United States, at least, who have programs that would tackle that particular area. And then there's always talks like this that students can attend, such as yourself. And those are a little bit harder because you open it up to the masses and hope that people will come and listen. I think the university route, you have more targeted opportunity to get that information across. But certainly there's also these types of seminars where people will go out, earth scientists in particular will go out and speak on topics like that.
Okay. Leonardo Molinari asks or says, what really surprises me, as Einstein said, is the perfect logic, rationality, and balance of the universe. Did it encourage you in any research moment?
Ooh, gosh. Probably throughout my research, because there's always those moments where you feel imbalanced, especially in research, when something you've spent years doing it and then it doesn't work and you have to spend years doing it again. And that is the life of a researcher. And you have to find that sort of balance again in order to tackle the problem all over again, maybe with a new solution or a different perspective, or get a different team member who has a different perspective. So I'd say probably throughout research, that's the sort of quote that I could see I would print out and put in front of my lab table or something and on my research desk, certainly.
Okay. Bianca C. asks, as a woman studying astrophysics, I'm so glad there are people like you who inspire young girls every day. I am too, Mamta. What more can we do to fight prejudice and encourage girls to get into science?
Yes. Oh, goodness. One of my favorite topics because I'm so passionate about it for the same reasons that you are, Bianca. So I think one is being role models. So going out and talking, because I think it's what people say, at least here in the US, people say you cannot be what you cannot see. And I do believe there's some truth to that. If you don't ever see women out there who are scientists and engineers speaking, you may just assume that they don't exist and therefore you cannot be one. So I think one thing we can do is go out there more and talk more. Maybe it's one-on-one, maybe it's in a group setting like that. It doesn't matter. So long as we are out there and people can see us, I think that's important. I think there are also subconscious biases. So now that I'm a parent and I have 2 daughters and 1 son, and I have realized the importance of thinking about the decisions you might make and the impacts they could have when children are young, when you don't even realize you're doing it, or that somebody in your family is doing it. So I'll give you one example. And parents, grandparents, we don't mean harm we simply say what we think is right, but sometimes there's underlying meaning to it. So when my son was playing with my daughter's doll, a grandparent came in and said, "Oh, are you a girl? You shouldn't be playing with that." And I told that grandparent, "Stop. We're not going to say that." That's a subconscious bias in the other direction. Just because he's a boy, he couldn't play with the doll was the message that was being sent. So I think it's an onus on this next generation of parents to step in when it's really uncomfortable, like with a close relative, and say, "No, not in my house. We will not make those jokes. We will not make those statements. We will not keep a young girl from playing with a train or a car. We will not keep a young boy from playing with dolls. If he's curious about this, let him be curious." I think it's really going to be an onus on the next generation of parents to come in, because it takes, so let me pause here and say Dr. Nancy Grace Roman, one of the most incredible and impactful astrophysicists of our time, who recently passed away, invited me to her home one day, and I was thrilled that she would allow me to come into her home, and we just talked. And as she was talking, I said, "But Dr. Roman, I'm so frustrated that 20 years ago, I was told that this was the state of science and engineering, that there weren't women there. And 20 years later, we're still talking about the same topic." And she looked at me in her wise, wondrous, calm way and said, "Mamta, cultural change takes time. 20 years isn't long enough. It takes time." And that is when I realized that it's going to be up to us, the next generation, to continue making that change. And then the next generation may still have to make change, but we have to consciously make those changes. So I now am a parent, much older than you are, but charge on me. And I am going to make sure that my children are raised in a world where there is equality subconsciously as best as I can, in a way that wasn't there when I was growing up. And I think if we all continue to do that as a generation, we will make more change and make a more successful plan to finding equality in these areas where women can contribute the same way that anybody else can. And vice versa, by the way, where boys can be nurses and boys can be teachers and have the same exact impact.
And is this the focus of the Women at NASA program that you manage?
In a way. So that program is really about telling stories and being inspirational role models. So it's more the first thing that I was saying, that we go out and we are out there. We are the face of, so others can see, oh yeah, scientists aren't just this particular group that we may think of, that we are out there as a group doing all of these different things already. Yeah. So it's more about the role model aspect.
Helen Smahile asks, as a lead in strategy for external communication, messaging, and science in Spanish, what is your advice to coordinate science communication in another language that's not your mother tongue?
So we are doing that now. So right now what we have done is started communicating science in Spanish. We call it our Ciencia initiative. And we have somebody who originally comes from Spain, who is the project manager of that effort. And the thought is that eventually we'll grow this to be able to share science in multiple languages, not just Spanish and English, but others as well. We started with Spanish because in the US, it's the fastest growing demographic in the United States. And then worldwide, it's one of the largest and most commonly spoken languages as well. And we already had existing resources in Spanish. So it made logical sense to start there, build a process, and then hopefully apply that to other languages in the future. But we are doing that right now. So if you go to ciencia.nasa.gov, you will find science content in Spanish.
Wow, super. Giuseppe Galeandro says, "Hi, Mamta. As a submariner, I'm curious about how NASA cooperation with the U.S. Navy is going, and with submariners in particular."
Ooh,
or is
gosh,
it submariners?
I know, I don't know how you say that. I wish I knew more about that. I know that we do work with them, especially with programs like NEMO, which is where we call them aquanauts. So that's where our scientists and researchers go deep down into a submarine, into the ocean, to try to simulate this isolated sort of environment, much like what the astronauts might face when they're out in space. But I don't know too much more about that partnership or what we're doing currently with them, but we do have programs like NEMO, where we put people down in these isolated environments to try to simulate the psychological impacts of being in isolation out in space.
Okay. Jacopo Maschini says, as a student in space policies and institutions, in parentheses, I'm not an aerospace engineer or PhD, what will be the jobs open for me in this field?
Ooh, gosh. So that's probably one of my favorite things that people don't know about NASA and space agencies in general. And that's, you don't have to be a scientist or engineer or PhD to work there. In fact, the number of positions open where we need help in all sorts of other areas is mind-blowing. There are so many different fields that have to contribute to make space successful, space exploration successful. So there's an entire group that works down the hall from me in space policy, your particular area. So there are space policy jobs. There are communications experts, people who know how to take the incredible scientific discoveries and put them and frame them in a way that can make sense to the public. So then the public can see their return on investment of their taxpayer dollars. You always have to remember, at least when we're working for national space agencies, that it's the taxpayer who has funded these discoveries. So communication experts who know how to do that, lawyers who know how to keep us out of trouble and understand space and international space laws. You need all sorts of different people, videographers who can visualize that science data scientists. Gosh, you just need so many different areas and so many different types of jobs in order to make space exploration successful. It is certainly not PhDs alone or scientists or engineers. They're a large group of them, and they're the ones we think of because we are science and engineering discovery type of field. But there are so many other support areas, business analysts, for example, procurement, people who understand contracts and numbers and how to dole out the dollars that do that kind of discovery. So many different jobs, yours included with space policy.
Okay. Anselmo Bettio said, what are the best job opportunities in the space sector for a telecommunications engineer? It looks like a lot of people want careers in the space industry.
And that's the best part, because the space industry needs you. They need people who aren't just scientists and engineers. Of course, we need scientists and engineers as well, but we also need other areas like telecommunications. So I think it's really just, doing a little bit of research in your particular area of interest and how it relates to space. And if you can't find that, then it's doing things like this, coming and asking when you know a speaker from ESA or NASA or the Italian Space Agency is going to be talking, going and asking them, do you have people who are in space policy? And the answer is yes. Telecommunications, the answer is yes. And then at least it exists there, and then finding the path will be a little bit easier.
Okay. One of my staff wanted to know what you're working on right now. What's your current project?
Yes, so now I've taken on more of a supervisor role, and I have 4 main things under me. So 1, I lead a team who does all of our strategic messaging for our senior leaders. And in fact, it's that team, I have to give them big ol' hand, because they're the ones who helped me put this presentation together, including the slides and the words and all of it. And they're an incredible team that really know, and you're about to hear for the last couple of questions, you're about to hear a whole set of jobs that are not science specific or engineers. These are people who have jobs in totally different fields. So they have digital marketing backgrounds. One is a business major, I think. He had majored in business and come out, and they're helping us do strategic messaging. And that's executive communications, really putting together the messaging for our senior leaders as they go out and talk about our science and what we're doing. I also lead the team that does the Ciencia initiative, so the science and Spanish team, and then digital. So that includes both our website, science.nasa.gov, as well as the larger, we're very distributed web presence. So you'll see solarsystem.nasa.gov, science.nasa.gov, different websites, all talking about science. And then also our social media. So if you look at our leader, Dr. Thomas Zurbuchen, on Twitter, we handle his account, making sure that he has the content that he needs because he tweets on his own account, and just really streamlining the messaging that goes out in the way that people are consuming their information now. So becoming more integrated with how do people want to receive their science? Do they want it in the form of a video? Do they want it in the form of a 30-second video rather than the 5-minute video the scientists want to put out? So really, that's the kind of stuff that I'm doing now.
Okay. Akash Kumar asks, how is 3D printing application helping in different space areas?
Yes. So that's a really good question. So 3D, I do want to point out, since you're bringing it up with your question, if you go to, let me see if I'm going to get it right. There's an entire slew of 3D printable files for our spacecraft. I think it's nasa3d.arc.nasa.gov. But I don't know the answer to his or her question directly in terms of how it helps. I do have a couple examples. So I know a few years ago on the International Space Station, they had tested out the 3D printer that's on board and printed out a wrench, I believe, and actually used it. So we are applying it in ways, at least on the human side, where we'll be able, and again, all of that is to see if we could do longer term space travel further from the Earth. And so that's what they were really testing out, is their ability to print a tool when they needed it, rather than having to fly everything on board. And that was successful. So that's one example of how we've used 3D printing to help inform space exploration goals.
Okay. Anna Maria Nasisi asks, what are your key messages for women who are just starting in STEM activities?
Yes. So one is to, I think probably my favorite advice I ever got, and that I took, thankfully, and now I pass on to other young women, is to, as you get into the field, don't be afraid to find a mentor. So if you are observing the people around you and you really connect with somebody, don't be afraid to ask that senior scientist to help mentor you, to help you find a career path in science or engineering. I think the worst thing that we can do is not ask, because if you ask and they say no, okay, move on to your next one. But they could say yes, and that could have a profound impact on your career. So that's the first thing I would encourage you to do, is to ask. So that's especially for young women coming straight out of school and have their first job. I'll take it a step further for the women who have been in their jobs for, let's say, 5-7 years, and now you're coming on that point where you're deciding if you're going to have a family. I think the next important thing is to find the policies, or ask about the policies that will help with your family flexibility so you can build your family. Because what we're seeing, what the data has shown, is that women will come into the field and then they'll drop off somewhere in their 30s. And inevitably, that is usually because we have families, we have children, and we don't have the flexibility that we need to balance both. So what I would encourage you to do for that next group of women is to ask about those flexibilities. I know with me, when I wanted to work a little less and I was having my babies, and my babies are still young, but one of them is 1 year old. And when I was pregnant with that particular baby, I did ask to go part-time, even if it was shorter term. And I intended to always come back to my job. And when I asked, I was so nervous and I wasn't sure what the answer was going to be. And there were people who said, "Ooh, I wouldn't ask that. They're just going to say no and think less of you." But I encourage you to not listen to those people. Ask the question. And if they think less of you, who cares? You need flexibility. You need balance in your life, and you need people who are going to help you. So that's what I would overall, whether you're coming out of school or you're advanced in your career, I would just encourage you to ask and not listen to the people who say, "Ooh, I wouldn't ask. They're probably going to fire you." Those are not the people I would listen to. You may just need a mentor who can help you to figure out how to ask. So find a mentor. Don't be afraid to ask for a mentor. And then if you're more advanced in your career and you're ready to find some more balance because of life decisions you've made, ask.
That's great advice. I wanted to mention one of the programs that we do here at the U.S. Embassy with NASA every year is Space Apps. It's one of our flagship programs, and one of the programs where we get hundreds and hundreds of young Italians involved in trying to bring NASA information or package it in a way that people would like to see it. Are you working with that at all?
I help with the back end to make sure that so one of my other areas of expertise is in website backend. So making sure that things are secure and robust on the back end. So when you have a surge of people who come onto the Space Apps website, it doesn't fail. It doesn't go down on us during the competition, no less. And so that entire weekend. So just building up a robust framework on the back end. So I'm not involved in the challenge day to day, but on the back, I am looking at that website going, okay, it cannot fail when we have a surge, because you never know when somebody's going to tweet about it. This usually happens. And then you have thousands more people who go, ooh, I want to do that. And they come on and check out the website. So that's really where my small little role has been. But I love the International Space Apps Challenge too. We really feel, I know leadership above me feels that that could be even bigger and better than it is currently. And the way that it can engage people around the world is incredible. That's another way for the young student who asked the question. Hopefully you're still watching, ways that you could be involved. So I mentioned citizen science and internships, but the International Space Apps Challenge is another way where you could get involved. It happens in October annually. So look up International Space Apps Challenge.
Okay, and we'll be promoting it here as well, but thanks. Anna Maria Nassisi asks, what are your key message? Oh, I'm sorry, I read that one already. Sorry about that. Raffaele Minichini says, what's your idea about NASA-SpaceX cooperation? Will space exploration be a matter of private companies in the future?
Oh, absolutely. So there are teams at NASA who looked ahead, thought ahead, and formed partnerships with these private companies right away. So one of the big goals is getting astronauts in America back on American rockets. So getting American transportation back into space in low Earth orbit. And that's really what companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Boeing, that's what they're doing. They're building the next spacecraft that can take our astronauts to the International Space Station. So in terms of, do I think it could be a private space world in the future for low Earth orbit that is within so many miles of our Earth, where the International Space Station is, and many of our Earth satellites are? Absolutely. I think that's the goal, that they do low Earth orbit, and then NASA and our space agencies do the deep space, going to Mars, going to the moon, deep space travel.
Great. Do we have time for one more question? Okay, I'm going to ask it anyway. One more quick question. Anna Maria Nassisi asks, she says, Venus is similar in structure and size to Earth. What's the interest in this as a future mission?
Yeah, so we've been to Venus at least once in the past, and there have been teams, and there are teams currently at NASA who have a strong interest in going back to Venus. We don't have a planned mission to Venus right now, but I think that they will continue to probably propose, and maybe one day they'll be selected. In fact, one of my projects in the past was building out an instrument, a mass spectrometer that could be used on Venus. Venus is challenging. You ask why, what's the interest? So it also pushes our materials technology, because Venus has a caustic atmosphere. The materials we have here on Earth, they will melt almost immediately in the Venus atmosphere, because it is just so hot on Venus, the hottest planet in our solar system. So I think it also pushes, when we have to build something that's going to go to Venus, it pushes our technology here on Earth in terms of finding materials that could last in that type of atmosphere. So I think there are great benefits to studying Venus and to actually send landers there in terms of pushing our own technology here on Earth. So maybe in the future, we'll see another mission there.
Okay. Well, this was just super. Thank you so much for your presentation, all of those great answers. Thanks to our audience for sending us in questions. Really, there's some amazing, interesting people out there, and people who are interested in science. So thanks again. I wanted to mention that our series is going to continue. Next week, it'll be in Italian with two people from the Italian Space Agency, Gabriele Mascetti and Eleonora Amenito. So we'll be back next week, and Francesco will be moderating in Italian next week. Francesco, did you want to say a couple words?
Giusto per ringraziarvi, è stata un'altra bellissima lectio magistralis con tante belle domande, devo dire un pubblico, come hai detto tu Marlene, estremamente appassionato. Anch'io vi do appuntamento alla prossima settimana, torneremo con l'Agenzia Spaziale Italiana in compagnia dell'ambasciata statunitense. Grazie Marlene e thank you very much, Mrs. Nagaraja.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Thanks. We'll see you all next week.